Chapter 11 At Sugar Cane's. His name was Alfred Kane, but his friends called him Sugar. Sugar Kane was the owner of one of the largest candy distributing companies in the East. Chances are, if you've ever bought a candy bar east of the Ohio River, it came from Alfred Kane's warehouse. It was a very large business. But Sugar Kane was still interested in everyone who worked for him. So when he saw Mac's big rig pull up in the warehouse yard, Mr. Kane was very much relieved. So was Mac and Henry. They had made that telephone call to Mrs. Green, you see, and a happy, tearful conversation it was. As soon as Mac dropped off his load of candy, he was going to take Henry home. Henry liked Mr. Kane the minute he saw him. There was something about the twinkle in his eyes that even his spectacles didn't hide that made him seem friendly. And with his gray hair and mustache, Mr. Kane looked not a little like Santa Claus. Henry liked Mr. Kane's office, too. It was warm and cozy, and the walls were lined with shelves containing every single product the big warehouse handled. Imagine seeing every kind of candy bar, cookie, and cake all in one spot. It made you hungry just to be there. When they had seated themselves and recounted their adventures, laughing quite a bit in the bargain, Mr. Kane looked forward in his chair and took a long, close look at Henry. "Henry Green," he said, "if it won't offend you, I would like to ask you something about those big brown spots you seem to have all over." It seemed to Henry that he had explained 1,000,000 times already, but he went through the story again from beginning to end. Mr. Kane was listening closely, paying keen attention to Henry's every word. When Henry finished, Mr. Kane spoke. "And so you say that this Dr. Fargo of yours called it chocolate fever, eh? I find that terribly interesting." "Well, I find it just plain terrible," said Henry. "Big brown ugly spots all over, looking like a freak, people staring at me, and all because of chocolate." "And all because of chocolate," Mr. Kane echoed. He shook his head once or twice, and a strange look came over his face. There was a long silence. When Alfred Kane spoke again, it was in a quiet voice. "Henry Green," he said, "let me tell you a story. It's about a boy I once knew, a boy like you. Oh, this boy loved chocolate too, like you once did. Chocolate in the morning? Yes, morning, noon, and night he ate the magic stuff. And if you think you have invented new ways of chocolatiness, so did this lad. Chocolate-covered fried chicken, chocolate French toast with chocolate syrup. There was no end to the ways of chocolate with this boy I'm speaking of. And, like you, a strange thing happened to him. In fact, the very same thing." "You mean," said Henry, suddenly excited. "Yes," said the old man with the nod, "big brown spots all over." "Chocolate fever!" Henry exclaimed. "The very same." Henry could hardly contain himself. "But how did he—" "How was he cured, you mean?" Alfred Kane was smiling now. "Well, the cure was in two parts, and the first was the most important. You see, this boy I once knew had to learn a very sad lesson, as all young people must do. Although life is grand and pleasure is everywhere, we can't have everything we want every time we want it. It's a hard lesson, but it comes in time." "Yes," said Henry, "I think I understand. Maybe I have had too much of a good thing."
"Indeed."
"I'll eat less chocolate then, only when I really, really want to."
"Very good. That is half the battle."
"And the second half?" Henry asked.
Alfred Kane smiled. "Very simple when you think about it. What is the exact opposite of chocolate? What is the one flavor that is the reverse of the chocolate we know and love?"
Vanilla!
Mr. Kane walked slowly to his desk, opened the top right-hand drawer, and brought out a small white box. Vanilla pills, Henry Green. The very thing that will cure your chocolate fever within the hour. That is, if you have truly learned the first and hardest part of your cure. Henry could hardly speak. He wanted to laugh, he was so happy. He wanted to cry, he was so sad. But all he could do was nod. "Oh, wahoo!" said Mac with a whoop. "Vanilla pills! Who would have thought it?" "There's one more thing," Mr. Kane said. "That young man I spoke about, the one who reminded me so much of you."
"Yes?"
"When he grew up, he decided to spend his life bringing joy and happiness to others. And the way he did it, you see, was to bring chocolate to the world. To make sure that when anyone wanted pleasure, there would be chocolate someplace close by." Henry thought he knew who that other boy was. And before we read, what is your prediction? Who do you think the little boy that Mr. Kane is describing was? "His name was Alfred Kane," said Alfred Kane, "but his friends called him Sugar." Mr. Kane stepped forward and shook Henry's hand. "Now you run along with Mac, and if you take those pills on the way, I guarantee that your chocolate fever will be gone by the time you get home. Goodbye now, and remember what I've said."
"Goodbye, Mr. Kane," said Henry.
"You can call me Sugar."
"And you can call me Henry."
Let's take a second. Let's look at the illustration. I see why Henry would have been very surprised and in awe when he came into the store. I see in the picture they show us all the different kinds of candies that Mr. Kane had at his warehouse. And look, there's Mac smiling and waiting. Here are even more of the candies. I think it's really cool that this chapter and the story indeed seems to have a central message. Can you figure out what the central message might be? Let me know, and we'll find out soon. Bye.